Addison Duane.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast. Hello, hello. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to chat with you.
So first of all, we've been trying to get this recording up and going it's been a few weeks. We've both had our trials.
Yeah, third time's a charm. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, we are here and we are here together to talk about something that's pretty important. But before we do, I'd like you to share a little bit about how we met, because it is just like, it's one of those stories that I feel like, when you connect with someone, you connect with someone.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that, because we met at an ultimate creeper moment for me. So I'm glad that it was positive for you, because in hindsight, it was probably really intense. But no, we both were presenters at the Trauma Informed Schools Institute in Minnesota. And that was so fun and really, really cool. And I went to your session. And I sat in the front row because there was no other seats, which in hindsight, like, also was a great experience because I felt really close to you. And as the presentation was going on, you were presenting on, what was it? Now I'm forgetting.
De-Escalation.
That's right, De-Escalation. And the Ross Green Plan B.
Yes. Oh, that one.
Yeah. And at the end, I told my friend that I was sitting next to, I said, probably about 4 minutes in, I said to her, we need to be friends with this girl. And then immediately after the thing, like, a couple people came up to you and were talking about your presentation. I just like beelined to the front and I was like, hi, my name is Addison. That was the most impactful experience I've ever had in my life. Can we please be friends? And Julie Rose was like, hello, thank you. Nice to meet you.
It was, so first of all, there is nothing, I have to speak honestly as a human, like when I'm presenting in front of people, I can read people one-on-one, but a whole audience, I regress into like, everyone's hating this, no one's engaging, what is happening? And so it was literally like the most beautiful validation that I could have gotten. I'm like, at least 2 women like me.
Oh, like you. By the end, like after that, we walked out, and for the rest of the trip, we were calling you our new BFF, even though we interacted with you.
That's what it felt like. We got the selfie and everything.
I know, we made you take a selfie. Just like, oh my God. We had no shame in how excited we were because content was so amazing. But more than that, and this is the thing, like now in this world that I've experienced a lot of presentations, your style of presenting things, I felt like I was in a therapy session in the best way. I was just like, every single teacher needs to sit and experience what this woman has to offer, because it's not just like great content for sure, but it's the way that you do it. I was like, oh my God, this girl, it was incredible. So kudos, seriously.
It's music to my ears, and I'm so glad we connected, because I've since become one of your numerous Instagram stalkers, and we're aligned on a lot of things in that we are not only attuned to the importance of getting this work out to educators, and you're a former or current educator yourself?
Yeah. So I was a classroom teacher for 6 years, and I've taken a leave of absence to do a PhD program. My emphasis is in trauma-informed practices, but it's an educational psychology program.
Yes. So I love that. There's a real clarity about how necessary and important this is.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really love about you, and part of why I'm having you on the show today, is because you're also talking about a lot of the cultural nuanced racial legacies that so influence how we're dealing with traumatized kids and working with some of the bigger historical traumas and kind of looking at our part in that. Whether you're, and just for everyone who's listening, well, I'll actually speak for myself. I assumed I knew your racial identity, but I don't. But I'm a white woman.
As am I. Yep.
So we're 2 white women having a conversation about something that impacts white women.
And I think too, just to say at the beginning, before we kind of dive in, like, I am definitely not doing this work by myself. And I think that is something that over the years I've really come to learn. Like, the result, the Instagram posts and the captions I'm writing might be like my words in some way, but they are heavily influenced by people of color who have been doing this work and shouting about these things far longer than me. And so, like, I am not a silo. This is very much a collective process. And so, like, there are amazing people who are really furthering this conversation. And so just want to say, like, it's awesome that it's coming through this platform of mine on Instagram, but at the same time, like, it's not just me, if that makes sense.
Thank you for saying that. And also I think too, just to piggyback on that, a lot of what I've heard from my friends and colleagues of color is this exhaustion of having to educate white people about their part in things. And so I really do appreciate that we are coming together to talk about something that impacts us without having to rely on people of color to educate us about this.
100%. Yeah.
And I really do. If you're a white woman teacher or white male teacher or someone who identifies with this, I honestly think this conversation could be helpful to anyone listening, but especially if you are a white person of whatever descent, I do think it's really important that you have other safe white relationships in which you can explore whatever legacies and baggage that you carry within your own lineage.
Yeah. I mean, and if you're a teacher, 80% of the population of teachers is white. So we probably are talking to you, like
Yes.
that's the reality. And
Yeah.
so I think, yes, 100%. We have to rely on each other to understand, to get messy and have these really hard conversations without going to our friends and colleagues of color and saying, like, is this problematic? Should I do that? Like it's on us. So
Yeah, we get to hold that burden and work through it and get clarity with ourselves. And it's not to say that we don't have conversations with our colleagues or friends who don't look like us, but there is an element of let's explore that with people who wouldn't be burdened by exploring this with them. And that's usually people who are unpacking this stuff themselves. One of the things I wanted to do before we get into the actual content of what we're here to discuss is I wanted to set an intention. And I was thinking about this because you already know, if you're listening to this podcast, we're here to talk about this thing called white savior complex. And I know for myself, Addison, that I can get really aggravated when I see this out in the world. And I can also get really fearful and scared when I see some of that in myself or have in the past. And so I was really thinking about, what do I want this podcast episode to be and how do I want it to impact people? And the clarity I got as I sat with that question is, I hope that we're saying things that resonate with our listeners and can feel safe enough for them to dive deeper into how it manifests or has manifested for them. The truth I've come to, and I don't know if you share this belief, is that in America, at least, and probably in the world, but I can just speak as an American, you can't grow up in our country and not have been impacted by the isms and racial beliefs and racial structures. And it's like having lived as a fish in a bowl of water with poison.
Yeah.
And it gets through our gills. Yeah. And in order to start healing from that, we need to identify the poisons and how they might have taken on a different nature of their own.
Yeah.
And so this is like, it can be ugly and messy and painful and uncomfortable and scary and shame-inducing.
Yes.
And it's part of the work.
Yeah. And it can also be a huge opportunity for positive growth and for really, really impactful change that happens internally that allows you to be a better human.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for kind of I offer that intention to our listeners. Thank you for being here with me to dive into this.
Of course.
So let's get to it. What the heck is white savior complex?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because the white savior complex is a shorter abbreviated term of something that's been coined the white savior industrial complex. And people have been studying this for several years in really looking at it along the lines of film and television and how that complex has kind of permeated society and culture because of the narratives being told on screen. But there is an incredible researcher who's in Ohio. Her name's Dr. Brittany Aronson, and she has written on the white savior industrial complex and now is kind of shifting into the white savior complex. And she really defines it as just this confluence of practices and processes and institutions that really use historical inequities to validate white privilege. And so ultimately what she says is that this white savior complex is the idea that white people are rewarded for saving those who have been historically underserved, underrepresented, less fortunate in the privileged, area. And then are also able to, in that same capacity, they're saving them and doing a lot of great work in their mind, but also completely disregarding the policies and the systems that have created and maintained a lot of oppression, right? So like Americans can go to Haiti, for example, and do a mission trip where they are going to, potentially spread a religion or rebuild something. But while they're in there, they're also completely avoiding the fact that the United States has exploited Haiti and has contributed to their poverty and their corruptions. But we feel good about going and doing charity after the earthquake, even though there are systems and structures that we had a hand in, if that makes sense. It's a dense topic. It's really dense.
So, I mean, just from what you shared there, I already learned a lot because I did not know that it stemmed from
the industrial
complex. It totally resonates that this is, or at least started centering around film, because I think these are stories and narratives that are really familiar and really entrenched in white American culture, which is there are less fortunate people that need to be saved, and we whites are the saviors.
Yep.
And in fact,
that rewarded, we're going to feel good and we're going to like elevate ourselves in some way because we are here to save them.
And that is quote unquote doing the right thing.
Right. From that perspective, yes. And so what's interesting though about that is that like kind of just thinking about that, just a definition level or I don't know, stepping back to analyze that. People of color don't want to be saved. Like not only do they not want to be saved, they don't need to be saved in the way that we, and I'm saying we as white people are thinking that they do. You know what I mean? So like, for example, a lot of it thinking in education, like if we are working in underserved communities, which for all 6 years of my career, I worked in underserved communities. A lot of times this presents in different ways. A teacher feels like I'm a better support for my student than the families and the communities around them because I am here to save them in some capacity. Or I am helping this student, but there's a really good chance that the way I'm helping them by having their journals and thoughts and feelings actually came from that really horrible film about the white woman who goes into what is the name of that?
Minds.
Is it Dangerous Minds or what's the other one where
Freedom Riders?
Yes, that's the one.
That was the newer version of Dangerous Minds.
Okay. Yep, that's the one. That's the one where I am completely complicit in this. Like I had my students journal their first year because I saw, is it Hilary Swank who's like, wow, what an impact. These journals are changing their lives. Like, is this doing anything to close the equity gap? Like it's not. And so that's important.
This is important because I don't really remember Freedom Riders, but I grew up on Dangerous Minds, and I grew up being like, Michelle Pfeiffer is a badass. And
the best teacher you've ever seen.
The best teacher, right? And that's what I want to do. And we're now talking about that might be a flag of concern.
Hugely, right?
One of the things that you just, there's a lot of directions we're going to go and we will do that. One of the things you just shared that I think is important for everyone listening and, for me as well to be asking myself is, have I had that thought that I am a better support or resource than the other people in this kid's life that are already there? And talk a little bit about why that might be harmful or outright dangerous to that
No,
kid.
that's a huge one. And I really think unpacking that single line specifically is kind of the beginning of us starting to understand what this is and how it's so embedded in everything we're doing in education. Because I cannot tell you the amount of times that I have sat in a staff room at a lunch table with very well-meaning white teachers who say, oh, I have a parent-teacher conference and I'm going to offer all these suggestions, but at the end of the day, my room's the only room where this kid's going to read. And so like, it's on me to make sure that I teach them to read. And it's just like so baffling and yet so pervasive. Like, this is the reality. I think you could ask any teacher and they've heard something along those lines, but it's harmful because we as teachers are with them for 9 or 10 months out of the year. We have to acknowledge and respect that the families and the communities that are wrapping their arms around their students, it may not look the way that our kind of white-centric mind wants it to, but it is exactly what that child needs and will need and deserve for years after they're out of my 5th grade classroom. You know what I mean?
Yes, and it's also one of the things that I believe happens and has historically happened with this white savior mentality and complex is that it has justified disempowering other people. And I mean, that's literally how colonization and the American genocide occurred, which was these native people needed to be saved and civilized, which completely eradicated and threw heaps of cultural shame upon their own practices and their own ways of doing things that actually served their people. They didn't need any helping. It justified our stepping over onto their side of the street. And one of the things in the example you gave about that teacher, and I think a lot of teachers can probably identify with that example of like, I'm the only one who's going to get this child to read. Yeah. And there's a desperation in that. There's a powerlessness in that. And I think that's important to acknowledge too, that if your only goal is to get a child to read and you feel like you're the only one doing that, it can feel like you're alone and like, no, who's helping? Why isn't, right? It can feel crazy making. But instead, if you look at that and kind of bleed out of the lines of that container and start to look at, okay, so what else is going on in this kid's life and their family's life and their parents' life that might prohibit them from making reading a priority, right? And or are there circumstances that are making it really difficult to want to sit and help this kid read at night, right?
Do they read fluently in another language? Do they read amazing books that are all, like not the ones you're reading at school? Like, are they actively reading recipes to help with a family meal? Like, what I think a lot of times define as some of those standards that we are going at alone, I think are oftentimes being taught in a lot of different ways. It just doesn't fit the mold of, again, that like white-centric kind of like, this is how it should be. And that's problematic.
Well, and also when we have that mentality, like, I don't have help from the parents or the other caregivers or the community members in this kid's life or even other teachers, we have immediately cut off a potential resource.
Absolutely.
Right? And we do that by looking at the person or the community as unavailable and unwilling to help, when in fact they might be helping this child in ways that we're not even aware of.
And will continue to when we are no longer, quote unquote, helping the following school year. Like, they are the students, they are the support that will continue. I do think though too, it gets tricky when trauma gets involved. And I think that the role of trauma has sort of even expanded or exacerbated the white savior problem, because when I think about a student who experienced a severe trauma at the hands of a parent, there is something in that where now there's validation of, well, I do know better than this person if this is how they're choosing to parent this child. But again, I think you have to step back and say, what is my role in this? Like, I am not the parent. Okay. I am the teacher. I'm here to do this job. I'm not, like, I'm not going to overstep. And I think in white saviorism, a lot of times too, there's a huge overreach in boundaries, right? Like people bringing clothes and food to school, well-meaning again, but again, like there are community resources. We have a lot of different strategies and ways to approach it, but I went on a tangent and now I don't even know where I was going.
What was I talking about?
So worked up. I'm like, oh, don't do that. Don't bring the pair of pants in. No.
Well, okay. So actually, tell me why that would fall under the categorization of white savior complex, bringing clothes or supports to school.
Yeah, if you're bringing physical clothing, there is a huge assumption there that the family and the community is not capable of getting the basic necessities and the needs met of that student. And again, like I have seen it where a teacher says, well, their pants are really dirty, so I'm going to give them a pair of pants. And it's like, okay, but also, what if the kid likes to wear that's their favorite pair of pants for sensory reasons, or that is a pair of pants that the grandparents gave them for Christmas that are really special? Like, who are we to like set those standards? And then by bringing the pair of pants, for example, there's so many underlying assumptions that then kind of invalidates the parents. And a lot of times the reaction on the family side is, how dare you bring these items? Because this sends a message that I'm not capable of meeting those needs for my kid. And it's kind of a slap in the face a little bit. Like there has been pushback when I've seen this in real time, like of a parent coming in and saying, why'd you send those home for my kid? So
yes. Yeah. And that's a really interesting example because the assumption, it's as if it jumps over multiple steps, right? The first step being, let's say a kid comes in with some dirty pants.
Yeah.
Maybe waiting a couple of days to actually assess, is this a pattern? Is it just the pants? Is the kid looking disheveled or unkempt? And kind of pausing to be curious about what might be going on rather than jumping to a conclusion, but then regulating enough to find a way to connect with the family about a potential concern, right? If it is a concern, the way you approach a family about something that could potentially be very shameful or shame-inducing will make the difference between you being effective with that family or not, right? If you come in thinking, I'm right and this needs to change, you need to help wash your kid. Yeah. I mean, I'm not even a parent and I'd already be defensive about that.
Absolutely. And I think to add to that too, like if there is something that maybe you're not comfortable going to the family, then even before you go to buy that pair of pants, check in with one other person who's in the mental health field. Like I know for a fact that my school social workers would have said to me in response, like, hey, we have an entire room full of pants. You do not have to spend your own money. Like, let me handle that conversation because I'm trained in those conversations with families. Or we'll just flat out say, like, this isn't a good idea. And so just to check in with somebody before you go to act on it, I think seriously, like I'm envisioning my school social worker just being like, Duane, no, what? No, you're not going to buy these pants for this. No, let's talk about it. So it's important just to have that resource. And because I think too, a lot of times with the white savior complex and with teachers, this is just kind of how we are programmed, I truly believe, is a lot of times we want to do something immediately. Like we want to act as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We're very busy. We have way too much. There's way too much put on teachers nowadays. But at the same time, like if our first response is, I need to do something, one of my favorite people in the whole world, Alex Chevron-Bennett, says, when you have that impulse, stop. That's your sign. Stop, back up. You need to check in.
The saying I love is don't just do something, stand there.
Ooh, I love that.
Right? Which is opposite of what we're taught. We're taught don't just stand there, do something. When in reality, when it comes to providing trauma-informed care as a teacher, a lot of these problems are not problems you're going to be able to do anything other than offer a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot that you are powerless over, but the way in which you might be of best service to that kid and their family is by being a witness, by doing nothing but witnessing their life,
Mm.
right? And helping them identify actually the strengths that they are utilizing and relying upon to get through a very difficult situation or life experience.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. And two, I think that like when we have that immediate response of I know better, I'm better trained, I know, like just to circle back to that, and then also thinking about the pants situation or whatever it is, you know, like with trauma affected kids, they are constantly presenting high stress responses. Like they are continually showing symptoms in lots of different ways. And so we as teachers can respond appropriately, avoid advocating for suspension, like keep them in our classrooms, build relationships, but we can't save them. And at the end of the day, we really shouldn't want to. You know what I mean?
What should we want? What I don't love the word should, but what ought we want to
I
do
know I also
instead?
don't love the word should, but this feels too important to me, honestly. Like I have to, I just like, I thought about I'm like, I always reframe the word should, but we should not want to save kids. And if you are in the profession to save a child, you are in the wrong profession. And ultimately, and it's a hard thing to come to, but this is not the career for that. We are here to support and love and advocate and enhance and facilitate and enrich, but we are not their saviors.
So I was just going to ask you, what do you do instead? If you're not there to save, if you're not, Michelle Pfeiffer thinking you're going to like get this class up to speed and save everyone and right and be the educational seed that pulls them out of this, generational trauma and poverty or whatever the thing is,
Yeah.
how do you then show up to work?
I mean, you shift away from that towards other really meaningful, incredible things that you are working on and focusing on. That's the reality. Like, I think that instead of thinking I need to save this kid, I can think, gosh, how can I really engage this student in math today? Or what is it how can I get to know and build such an authentic relationship with this student or all my students that I can tie in personal connections to everything I'm doing in the classroom? Like, what meaningful project would I get kids really excited about when it comes to fractions or whatever it is that's within the realm or our own locus of control, right? Like at the end of the day, we are academic instructors and we do have a goal to in some way advance them in those areas. And not that the emphasis of standardized testing helps that by any means, but that is like, we do have to teach them, right? And so what we can do is we can teach them. We don't have to teach them and save them. We can teach them and love them and care and check in and really be present. But it's not going to be at the end of the year that they're working with us, they're not going to have a completely different life trajectory because, like it's, yeah.
It's really interesting because this is I think I mean, we're all in the shadow part of this idea, the white savior complex, but we're another layer to that shadow or another uncomfortable thing to look at is ultimately the arrogance that is present in this belief that we can save somebody.
100%.
And it's really, I mean, I've certainly seen it within myself, like, and I think it's really easy to, especially in the social media world, want our gestures to be known, right? And want that to be praised as for me at least, a form of validation that I'm on the right side of history, doing the right thing. And when I do that, it stems from my inability to be with the truth of where we are culturally, right? Which is that I come from a long legacy of both white social justice warriors and white folks who wanted the opposite. And I'm present to all of that still existing today, right? And it's fucking uncomfortable.
Really, really, really is. And I think too, if you're thinking about like how it happens, I mean, just thinking about teachers specifically, we're pretty indoctrinated from the time we are pre-service teachers. Like the majority of people who are educators are white females. And so if they lived the savior complex and then they go into universities to prepare the next generation, they're going to say to you, like, sometimes a kid's going to come to school with dirty pants. by building relationships, you can get that kid a new pair of pants. Like that is part of the teaching. And so it's not necessarily the fault of it's not our own fault. I mean, it is, but like we are sort of conditioned to learn to believe this from the minute we become interested in going into education.
Yes.
They're well-intentioned and big-hearted, but it's romanticized in this way in pre-service training that is problematic.
You know, it's interesting too, because I think there are pieces of research and science that also give way to this way of approaching families and parents. For instance, the research behind screen time, right? And so you hear like little Johnny's watching 3 hours of TV a day, which by American standards, I think is around average. Like they're, screen time is up the wazoo. Who says wazoo? But it's up the wazoo. And it would be really easy to say to parents, that's bad, right? And it's stuff that I even myself as a therapist working with families and parents of traumatized kids and parents with their own trauma, like, the science says that screen time is harmful, right? And instead to pull back and actually get curious about what's going on with this screen time. Why is this family utilizing this screen time? And actually, this is where it gets away from black and white and into a lot of gray area. Yeah. Because oftentimes allowing little Johnny to watch 3 hours of, TV after school every day, it might impact his ability to do homework or, whatever it is, but it might be the regulation time that parent needs in order to be present for her child, or for that parent to go to a 12-step meeting because they're getting sober so they can be present for their child, or for that parent to get to therapy, whatever it is, that it might be exactly what that family needs. And so there's a real humility in having to pause and know that you might not know. You might not know everything that's going on, or the role that this thing is playing in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And as teachers too, I think sometimes we don't have to know. Like, it's not our job. We don't need to we don't need to interrogate or to know the situation. And I think it's more just like about knowing how to partner and how to effectively kind of like foster community and collaboration among the key stakeholders in that student's life, who are always the family, who are always the foster family, the aunt, the cousin, whoever it is who has that child's best interest at heart. And again, I think I love that you brought up arrogance. You really have reframed it for me, because that is when you sit and say, I know better than this community or than this group, like it's going to take a lot of humility on our part to say, I don't, and that's okay.
Yeah. What's interesting too is that a lot of that arrogance is literally just not quite informed. So again, I gave the example of, white colonialists coming over and really demonizing Native American Indian traditions and ways of child rearing. And what we now know is that they were those beliefs and ways of raising children were in so many ways far superior to what the European colonizers had going, or spread into our beliefs around child rearing. Actually, the European perspectives often caused great harm.
And it's the same thing with schools before segregation, like all Black schools that had all Black teachers were some of the most highly effective schools in the nation. And yet when we said we want to put white and Black kids together, also we don't want to employ these Black teachers because they don't meet the white standard, then that's when the schools got really terrible. So like they were doing great on their own, and we don't honor or acknowledge that at all in American history of learning about schools and legacies and impact.
Well, I mean, I think this is going into a whole nother layer. But if you think about first of all, I have heard from almost every friend of mine who is a Black woman or a brown woman that, and actually, you know, a lot of my family members who are Asian, what it feels like to their nervous system to be taught by someone who looks like them.
Yeah.
Right. So
Oh,
there was something
yeah.
tremendously regulating in terms of psychological safety to be in the presence of an educator who looks like them, right? Not to mention, in a lot of these cultures and communities, white people have been the perpetrators.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be, it's not always going to be the case, but it can be actually dysregulating to be receiving an education from people who look like the perpetrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something, you know, for all you white women out there who are teachers, that's not something you can change, right?
No.
You can't, you might reflect a body of people that are so far from how you carry yourself and work in the world. And that's something to be aware of as well, right?
Yeah, sheer presence. I mean, we know with genetic, like with all of the like genetic encoding that happens when trauma is generational. There is something to that that's triggering even 3 generations later sometimes. And so, I mean, I love Bettina Love because she talks a lot about white teachers who have no understanding of Black and brown student culture. And she really has a good quote. She writes a great article in Education Weekly. And she said, you know, I don't think that white teachers enter the profession to harm children of color, but they will hurt a child whose culture is viewed as an afterthought. And so when you,
Oh,
I know.
whoa,
I know.
I just want to pause and say that again. If I,
So
in a nutshell.
So let me be clear. I do not think white teachers who enter the profession want to harm children of color, but they will hurt a child whose culture is viewed as an afterthought.
That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
As an afterthought or as irrelevant to getting that child education.
So if we have no understanding of Black and brown student cultures, if we do not acknowledge and recognize and accept the families and communities that they come from, you know, then we are inadvertently and unintentionally harming kids.
Yeah. And you said the woman who wrote this was Bettina Love?
Yep, she's incredible. She's so wonderful, and she's really advocating a lot now for getting more teachers of color into the classroom. Kind of what you were saying about, you know, the reaction when kids get to have a student who looks like a teacher who looks like them. Yeah, no, she's awesome.
Oh, and I'll just so everyone knows, I'll have Bettina's information in the show notes as well, so you can check her out. I want to dive even deeper into the kind of psychology of, you know, this white savior complex and the inadvertent arrogance of it, because I don't think most of us are waking up being like, how can I be better than other people and how can I be arrogant, right? But from what I know about trauma and these dynamics of this subtle I'm better than or I know best, let me illustrate a story. I once went to a trauma-informed teaching conference held at the California Endowment. And of course, they were talking about ACEs. And they had a blind ACE study where all of the participants, all of the educators in the room could text in the ACEs that they had without anyone. So they didn't have to raise their hand. They didn't have to, like, you know, identify in a public way what traumatic experiences that they had gone through. But the results of the group would be, you know, on the projector. So everyone could see like what was in the room, what was present in the room. And must have been 250, 300 educators had higher rates of adverse childhood experiences than the general public.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe this. I want to say I'm curious about this, but I actually do believe this, that some of what happens is by focusing on the brokenness of other people, we avoid looking at where we ourselves feel broken and we avoid feeling our own pain.
100%.
And I had a colleague, I was in this fellowship program with a colleague who was a white woman, and it was really subtle, but she definitely had the white savior complex, and which, you know, we all can, but she was very overt with it. And it was just the way she spoke about going in to do these home visits with these families, and oh my gosh, there's addiction everywhere, and it's chaos in the house. And it was this layer of kind of disdain and disapproval, that I could hear in the way she described it. And I thought to myself, are you not aware of how pervasive these issues are within our own community?
Yeah.
Are you not aware of how many people suffer from child sexual abuse and physical abuse and emotional abuse and addiction and all of the isms within our own community? Like, the way you wouldn't talk about your own community in that way. So why is it okay to talk about this other one just because?
Yeah,
right?
because it's other.
Yeah, because they're other.
Yeah. And there is a sense of deflection, right? Like,
Yes.
when you can move your energy onto something else and someone else, it takes the onus off of you. And that's really at the heart of this conversation, I think, is that it's really time for us as educators and as people in this world to stop, to pause, to stand,
Yes.
to check in with ourselves and to do the work that's really hard.
It is really hard. I'd actually invite everyone who's listening to this conversation to kind of pause and do an inner scan and see what's present for you. I mean, I'm kind of feeling like here with you, Addison, I'm kind of feeling like in the zone.
Yeah.
And I feel that. I feel a little passion about this.
Yeah.
But I also, I notice feeling a little embarrassed that I still struggle with parts of this, a little like on the brink of shame, after thinking of some of the ways that this has manifested for me.
Yeah.
What's present for you as we're talking?
I mean, I think just in sharing these experiences and reflecting on the years that I was in the classroom, it is embarrassing. I think it's definitely a lot of shame in the sense that I am so guilty of all of this. And I come to this conversation fully recognizing that and knowing that, like, I am totally still a work in progress. And I think that, yes, there have been resources and conversations and friends and communities that I've been part of that have helped me better understand and kind of rectify some of these things. But at the end of the day, like, I am a white teacher who was trained by white teachers who, has worked in schools with Black and brown kids. And I have done some serious harm by not addressing some of these issues. So
yeah, actually, that reminds me, one of the first podcasts I ever did, I was a guest on. It's the Trauma Therapist podcast. And I'll link to this in the show notes. I love Guy McPherson, the host of it, because he asks the clinicians and professionals who come on the show about mistakes that they've made.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know. It's like, we need to talk about this all the time. But I talk about one of the first really big moments I had, which was I had this new client. It was early on in my training, and he was a African-American man, young man. He was, I think, 17 or 18, and he identified he was gay. He had identified that he was living in impoverished circumstances and with a family that didn't accept him and his gayness, him being gay. And I read his background, and my mind went to look at all these boxes checked against him. The sentiment was pity.
Wow.
And I walked into the room with that pity. And I knew he could feel it. And he never came back.
Wow.
And I deeply regret that. I don't regret it in the big scheme of things, because it was an important lesson that I had to learn as a white woman who's going to be a provider to people who didn't look like me or have experiences like me. But I regret that I impacted that kid in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the learning, but at the expense of someone else's sort of emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think all of us, especially, that was me one-on-one with a kid, but teachers, you have 30 kids in a classroom, And I think I'm so glad we're talking about this, because we do need to be able to sink into those feelings of guilt and or shame that might arise from having caused some harm.
Yeah. 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 And I think too, one of the things that I kind of want to just leave it with is there are things we can do, like there are really great things. And in order for us to start shifting away from it, I think one of the biggest thing as we're talking about is to stop deflecting, to start looking inward as hard as it is. And with that also needs to come, stop using vague language. So Dr. Aronson, who studies this in Ohio, says that white teachers more than others often give the appearance of being socially just. And we have this word of culturally responsive teaching. You read the book, you think you're going to bring pictures of the community that you serve. But in reality, what they're doing is just using really vague terms to mask things that end up just perpetuating inequality. So if you're not explicitly talking about racism, systems of oppression, white supremacy, if you're not talking about privilege and diversity and inclusion, then we're not really doing what we need to be doing. And so in addition to stop deflecting, look inward, check in, figure out what's going on internally, we also need to start being more clear and precise and having these conversations.
And this is really identifying the poison that's in the water. I mean, I'll speak for myself, although I do think this is a shared experience and it's been culturally indoctrinated. We don't talk about the elephant in the room. We haven't grown up in a culture where white people talk about whiteness. Every other culture that I know talks about their culture and their race and what it's like to live in a society as this kind of person. And it wasn't until my late teens, early 20s in college and probably not until 7 or 8 years ago that I saw public figures start to talk about whiteness. And so that opened the door to me talk about whiteness. Right?
No, it has to happen. It really does. And it has to happen in our own community. It can't be people of color saying, hey, this is a problem. We have to identify it and start to unpack it ourselves.
So 1, stop deflecting.
Yep.
2, stop using vague language, get explicit.
Yes. As best as possible. I mean, just use the right words and get rid of the vague terms of oh, this is uncomfortable. That was a microaggression. That's what it was. And so let's call it for what it is. I think really a huge one is to listen and learn from people who are expending mass amounts of emotional labor to educate us on the topic. I mean, outside of white people who are talking about this, there are so many people that have been sharing about this topic for a really long time. A really great account to follow on Instagram and Twitter is No White Saviors. It's actually called that. And it is a favorite of mine. It is super hard. I have to tell you, some of the images and things that they post are oh, that one really hurt, but it's necessary. We have to have that to know. And really, I think a big one too is just to believe people and to invest in communities and really decenter yourself from kind of this narrative that I don't know, it's hard to word, but yeah.
That's that word decenter. That's interesting. That is very interesting because I think part of the white savior complex has been kind of this narcissism that
specifically we call it sage on the stage. That is a style of teaching, one person in the front of the room on an elevated stage that is doing all the work, and that is completely centering the teacher in the space and in the instruction and in everything. And we need to get off the stage, we really do, in so many ways for so many reasons, but especially with this white savior complex.
Well, how do we balance that? Because for a lot of teachers, they are at the front of the stage, and here you and I we're literally on this podcast stage, and we do have valuable things to offer. So how do we balance it?
It's a both and. We have valuable things to offer, and so do all the other people at the table. I can be sitting at the table. I'm not going to be at the head of the table. I can be part of the student's IEP meeting. I'm not going to run it. I can offer strategies and suggestions. I'm not going to mandate that a parent take them or use them. And in the same way, I'm going to listen and respond and really take in what the family and support network around that child also can bring and offer so that it's a collective. decenter, it becomes a collaboration.
That is huge, because a lot of teachers listening will find themselves either at the head of the table as an administrator, running the IEP meeting, blah, 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 running the professional development, whatever position of authority that they are in. And if you are there, you also have that chance to raise people up to be equal to you, as in terms of their influence or their contribution to whatever direction this thing needs to take.
Yeah, I mean, take note of an IEP meeting is a great example, or a parent-teacher conference. Like, how much is your voice on and the family's is off, right? Like, if you notice that at an IEP meeting, the parent hasn't said anything in 25 minutes because a ton of psychological jargon has been thrown at them, and you want to stop and amplify the parent to honor their experience and their expertise, you can say, like, you know what, I'm going to pause you really quick. What do you think about this? What do you have to offer? Like, have you seen this at home? Have you experienced this before? What were they like in second grade? Just to allow that voice to be more present. And that just comes with an awareness.
I think too, this is really, and again, this will probably be antithetical to what teachers are taught to do, but to take off the expert hat. And in fact, I say this as a therapist who, by many accounts, I might be the expert, but the experts that I respect in the world don't present that way.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we will never be the experts of that specific child.
Yeah.
Will be. And like, yes, we might spend 6 hours a day with them for 1 year, maybe 2 if you loop. But other than that, like, they are the experts. And so taking that off and thinking like, you know what, I'm going to decenter, I'm going to stop and think and pause, and I'm going to honor that these are the experts of this kid, is going to change a lot.
And even the kid is the expert of themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how, I'll just speak from a personal experience, how healing that would have been for a teacher to stop and reflect that to me.
Yeah. And just say, hey, what do you think? Or like, what works for you? Yeah.
Yeah. Or you know yourself better than I know you. What can you tell me about what's going on?
Yeah.
Why do you think that happened?
Oh my gosh. Right? I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
So
we've
where do I go?
No, I feel like that's a lot to start with. You know what I mean? Like, we have given some tangible steps and things for teachers to do that I feel like any more than that might be like, that would hit their threshold of like, I can't, it's too much.
Okay. So let's say, we need to identify one more kind of potential actionable area for teachers, because I think a lot of teachers who are white and might have grown up in a culture where you don't talk about this stuff are probably wondering, well, where do I find that white friend to talk to, and how do I broach the subject?
Yeah.
We're obviously comfortable having this discussion, and I imagine that a lot of teachers would find this very, very uncomfortable.
100%.
What do they do? How do they find their person?
It's so hard, because it is just a really unique experience trying to find someone who's willing to dive in and to sit in the discomfort, because a lot of times we want solutions. But I think that social media really offers an incredible space for teachers who are wanting to get more invested in this. And that is to say that I have had a amazing opportunity connecting with people who have been doing this work way longer, or talking about this way longer. And it's also a space for people to reach out to another teacher in another state and say, I'm really struggling with this today. Can you just process this with me in a DM? Not me specifically, but like, I am seeing that across the board on Twitter and on Instagram. And so if you're looking around and you're thinking, I have literally no one, know that actually you have someone, you might just not have connected with them yet.
I love that. That takes social media from being a passive consumer of it to actually there are resources, people waiting for you to reach out to them to have these uncomfortable discussions.
Those connections, yes.
Yeah.
And spending a lot of time and effort on there. Like, people are really engaging in ways that are furthering our knowledge on this subject, which is incredible.
So Addison Duane, speaking of social media,
God, I was so nervous about that. I was like, please, God, do not let this sound like a promotion. Everyone follow these accounts, not me. Okay, number one,
no.
Unconditional learning. Okay.
This is a promotion. I promote. Because you have a great page. You have a
Oh my
great
God,
page.
no, seriously, it is like there are some really, really awesome educators that are talking about this stuff daily. And sometimes if you can't engage with it daily, that's fine. Like do what works for you. But other times it's like, wow, this is really hard. And what they say a lot is that we're unlearning because we learned as teachers, right? Like we learned the way, we learned the savior complex, we learned how to do it, we learned to bring pants to kids. And now we have to unlearn those things to decenter ourselves, to get off the stage and to do better for ourselves and our kids.
Love that. Actually, the first person who ever introduced me to the word trauma when I was 15 years old, she was a mixed blood Cherokee woman, and that's exactly what she said. We have to unlearn and relearn all of this stuff that was shameful, toxic, harmful to us and others. And it is a long process, but we can start today.
Yeah.
So Addison Duane, where can people find you? and all these other accounts. You do have to say where people can find you. And I would love for you to share all of these other people. Yes.
I can, for sure. And maybe you can put them in the notes and then people can follow them from there. So, okay, my handle is Miss Duane, MSDUANE. And then seriously, like the other people who are doing the really anti-racist, anti-biased, trauma-informed work we really need to be doing and talking about more are unconditional learning, teaching is intellectual, trauma-informed Montessori, teach and transform. We'll put them in the notes, but there are
all in the notes.
that really, really have changed my life in this realm. So
yes. Yeah. I mean, like some of these posts are literally enough you can take one and go have a staff meeting, a staff discussion about it.
What's so funny is I once posted about it, letting kids wear hoodies in class, and a principal sent me a picture of the post and my caption in his staff meeting, and all the teachers had it and they were discussing it. And he said, I am no longer requiring that students take their hoods off, and I just brought it to my staff and we're having a collective discussion about it. So you're right.
Yes, I love that. Go find that post, everyone. We'll link to it in the show notes. Addison, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Rose, I could talk to you for about 4 hours.
Thank you for earnestly and truthfully having what could be a difficult discussion with me, but so important. Yeah, I so appreciate your time. And your
hope we did it justice. I really do. I mean, you do everything justice, but I just wish that that this is something that was like clear and, like just that people can then take this and like internalize it and do something from here. And
yeah. Well, that is our intention for this podcast. Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed. Addison, thank you again.
Thank you.
Being here with me. All right. Bye.
Bye.